Hey everybody, it's Sam here again with 3D Printing Canada, and today I am super excited to announce the release of the new Flsun T1 printer. We get to be some of the first people to test out this printer. I've gotten it all the way through assembly now. It's definitely a good printer. It's a high-speed printer, and we are getting some pretty good quality off of it. I ran a Benchy, because we always run our Benchy first. Scroll back through the videos, you'll find out why. Definitely came off nice and clean. A couple of small little parts on it, but again, this was the factory slice. So they slice it for speed so that they can showcase that. They don't necessarily slice for the highest detail when they do that. And when we start talking about speed with this printer, this is definitely a fast printer. This one is running faster than the bamboo printers, and we're getting comparable quality off of it. It's capable of running up to 1,000 millimeters per second, which is just off the charts fast. Anybody who's been printing as long as I have knows that those were speeds we dreamed of a couple of years ago. You're also able to pull 3,000 millimeters per second acceleration, and this particular unit can push 90 millimeters cubed of PLA per minute, which that's a lot of filament moving through that hot end, which is why we were able to get some prints out nice and quick for you guys. We'll get into full specs a little further on into the video, but overall, I like this machine. It's a nice desktop size, a little larger than some desks maybe, but it's, for a Delta printer, it's definitely pretty compact and it's very user-friendly, and the assembly wasn't as hard as you might think. So let's see how we got to this fully assembled printer. All right, so we got the first layer of styrofoam off, and now it's time to start taking out the goodies. I'm gonna need some more space on this table. So, this is also a heavy printer, not quite as heavy as the S1 that we were dealing with before. So, I'm gonna pull out the printer base, and then this one is actually the top of the machine. I've got a couple of brackets here. I'll double check the instructions to confirm what those guys are. Our extruder head, arguably the most important part of the printer. The screen. And I do like, as I'm pulling it out, all of the parts are actually numbered, so it'll be really easy to match up the number of the part with the instructions when we get to building it. And speaking of, we've got our product service guide, which means over here are my instructions. I'm going to put those right at the corner so we don't lose them. The bag of mounting hardware, critically important. This is the camera. I imagine that's going to integrate with the AI for some of the detection features, as well as allow us to do some time-lapse videos. Our tester coil of filament. This is a pretty standard one that we're used to seeing. Sometimes we get a big spool, sometimes we just get the little guys. Let's see what's under this styrofoam here. Is there an easy way to get this out? There is not. This is my toolkit. It's just a little stuck. On to the second layer of goodies. We've got some bubble wrapped packages. These are labeled to tell me what they are once I get them out of their bubble wrap. I'm pretty sure they're part of the enclosure frame. The power cord. These are our enclosure panels. I'm not going to need them to last, so I'm going to put them over here. Another layer of styrofoam can come out now. And this is where we get to our actual movement system. So each of these is an upright that has the parallel bars attached to it, as well as the stepper motors. These do have to come out very carefully, so I'm going to take them out and get them on the table and not have to worry about hitting anything in the process. All right, so as you can see, we've got a lot of parts here, so it is time to get to building. I've got the instructions. I verified that I have everything that I need to have. We want to start with our top piece. And I'm gonna go ahead and remove any of the packaging material that's in here now before I start to build anything. So I've got my top shelf and it's asking me for the filament holder and 4 M3x6 bolts. So number 11 here is the filament holder. And I've got the M3x6 bolts here. I do have more of them than I need for this step, so I'm gonna open this bag carefully so that hopefully I don't lose any. There's nothing worse than having to go into the store and buy yourself some new metric bolts because you dropped them. So I've got both of the filament holders and they get installed into these little bolt holes here. Looks like they've got some nice slots on the actual filament holder to be able to adjust it just a little bit as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and just start the bolts in the holes, and with any luck I can slide it right over and then tighten them down. We always want to tighten the bolts until they're snug, but not so tight that we start to hear cracking or feel any of the materials that we're bolting into start to bend or warp. We're going for tight, not over tightened. Okay, so we've got both of the filament holders attached there, and now we can go ahead and slide the filament holder pin through the two of them. And it will turn so that it stays in place. Okay, so we've swapped over to the bottom shell now because now we get to start installing the actual framework of it. So we're gonna start at the bottom, install the uprights, and then install the top. The first step that we have to do is we do have to get the main wiring harness cleared out of the way to be able to install what I believe is the X upright. It is. So as I pull it out, I just make sure I take the zip ties out and get them out of the way. Saves doing the step later, and it gives me a little bit more flexibility in the lines to make sure I'm not putting strain on any of the connectors while we move them around. They pack everything nice and tight for shipping and make sure that everything is secure while it gets transported, but now that it's time to build, we need to make sure we've got some slack. So the first one that I need is number 3, which is our X-axis. It's going to get inserted in with the stepper motor facing towards the top, and it just slides right into this groove here. Keep my wires nice and safe. It has a nice little cutout here that you can see to make sure that the wires can come in without getting pinched or cut. These are the wires that we're going to need to connect to everything else. All right, we're going to continue on with the other parts now. We've got the Y, which is the next one. It's tagged as number 12 in our instructions. We do have a little wire sticking out there that's going to end up plugging into this little wire, so we'll keep them nice and safe and out of the way while we go ahead and slot this into place. This might be another phone a friend kind of printer where having an extra set of hands could help you out, but we'll see if I can do it without having to call one of the tech boys over. Last is going to be our Z. There's no wiring in that cavity, so I can just take it and drop it right into place. And we will take its number 16 sticker off of it as well. In case you need to move this at this stage, just be warned, these are not bolted in place yet. They have not clicked into place. They are just sitting in their grooves, and they will want to move and wobble if you try and move the machine. Always move by the base plate, even when it's fully assembled. That's just good practice. Now we get to take the top part and slot it on. Just going to bring this wiring harness over towards the center. That's where it's ultimately going to live. You want to make sure that you're keeping it supported until you have everything properly aligned to fit onto your uprights. And you also want to double check any of those slots and see if there's any wiring in there so that it doesn't get pinched, crimped, bent, broken. There we go. All right, we have everything just kind of resting together, and it's time to go back with the bolts. For this one, it's telling me that I'm going to need the M4x12 bolts, and we're going to need 24 of them. So we need to put 4 bolts in the top and 4 bolts in the bottom of each of these uprights to hold it together, and that's going to take a couple minutes. As I'm putting these bolts in, I'm actually not going to do all of one side at any given time. I'm going to go through and do 1 bolt out of each 4 set. That way I can make sure that I'm not putting any strain on any one arm too much at a time. All right, the next step is to install the extruder onto the arms of the printer. In order to do this, we're going to need to pre-insert these little M3 by 5mm bolts. We need to do one in the very front hole and one in the very back hole. And those are going to help function as set screws to hold the pins on the arms in place. So we just need to line it up and give it 1 or 2 turns, just enough that it stays in the hole so that we can go back with our Allen wrench and tighten it all up once we have it in place. So I've already got the first side mounted here, but we're going to be mounting the extruder onto the actual arms that carry it around. We bring it into the center of the machine to be able to do that. Make sure the logo's facing forward like the rest of the logos. And these pins that are on these columns can actually rotate forward. So what you're going to have to do, and it's a little bit tricky to do, is you're going to have to manipulate them around a little bit so that you can get one pin in through this front hole and one pin in through this back hole. So if we can start with the front and then rotate and turn. It's definitely tricky under the spring-loaded tension, but you will know when you get it in place because it will make a nice satisfying click. There we go. Okay, so I've got all of the arms snapped into place now. The extruder has come down a fair bit just because the weight of this has pulled the arms down. When the machine's not on, there usually isn't any lock preventing it from moving, so that's normal. But we're gonna come in with our Allen wrench and we're gonna go ahead and tighten all of these bolts up. These are acting as the set screws that hold those pins in place. It is pretty critical that we get them all nice and snug so that there's no play. That will definitely cause some print problems and may actually cause a catastrophic failure of the printer if one of them were to let go while it's printing. So now that I've finished tightening down all of the bolts that hold this in place, we've got a nice secure connection. There is one step that we aren't showing on camera, and that's I washed my hands in between. There's quite a bit of lubricant that came off of these rods while I was installing it, and I don't want to take the chance that I'm going to get lubricant somewhere it shouldn't be, because the next step has us doing an electrical connection. So we are actually going to have to connect the main cord for the extruder. There's a small port in here that it plugs into. So we're going to go ahead and plug that into its slot. Good idea to hold the extruder so it doesn't jump on you like this one just did for me. And next we're going to be connecting, this is actually a CPAP or a continuous positive air pressure line. This is what allows for the part cooling. So we do need to just get this right onto its port. And again, we're going to hold the extruder nicely in place. That's a nice rubber gasket to get it fit on there. But this bottom part is just plastic, so we're going to be careful that we don't break anything in the process. Just wiggle it down so it comes over that little notch on the plastic, and then we know that it's going to stay in place. It is just pressure that holds that in. But we do have 2 bolts to install to make sure that the bracket holding our extruder cable stays nice and snug. So we're going to grab some M6 bolts and get those bolted into place. Next up, we have the camera installation. So the camera has the cable pre-plugged in the back here. There's a little notch that the cable needs to come down through. So I'm just gonna kind of tuck it between my fingers to hold it tight. And there's 2 little notches here in the frame. That's what we need to snap it into. So we're just gonna line up the 2 tabs on the camera with those notches. Give it a nice hard push and it should all click into place for us. There we go. The camera's installed, and with this USB-C plug, it actually comes right down here. It is labeled that this is the port for the camera, so we can go ahead and plug it in. While we're here, we're going to go ahead and connect the LED light bar. This is the cable that was attached to this arm before it got installed to its actual power supply, which comes out of the main board in the bottom. These 2 cables line up very nicely side by side, and I'm going to cheat just a little bit, and I'm going to wrap them around the camera cable just to give us a little bit of cable management as well. We've got enough slack in the line that we can go ahead and do that, and that'll help keep the cord tucked back out of the way. So JST connectors will only connect one way. We just plug one into the other until we feel a click, and that's that part finished. So the next step is we get to start connecting the stepper motors and the limit switches. So I'm going to start on the same pillar that we were working on the camera with. I've got the stepper motor cable, has the black wires on it, and it's a nice fat 4-pin connection. And then we've got the limit switch, which has white wires on it, and that's a 3-pin connection. So Here is my stepper motor cable. I'm not sure how well you guys can see it, but we can see the tail of it actually coming out of the stepper motor here. So we just line it up. And again, it's a JST connector, so we got to click when it's properly seated, and we can only plug it in one way. And then we'll come over and do the limit switch as well. It just plugs into this little bitty daughter card over here. There we go. So now we get to do the other two. In order to continue plugging things in, we are going to have to run this cable that's coming up from the base behind this cover plate here. So to do that, we're going to have to remove the screws that are currently holding it in place so we can take the whole panel off. So we'll just get our Allen wrench in here and we will start removing them. I'm going to go ahead and put them right on the build plate as I take them out. It is a magnetic build plate, which should help keep me from losing any of these screws during this process. Now that the cover plate's off, we're going to take this cable here and we are going to run it up this channel that we revealed when we took that plate off. So we can actually tuck it right in between the hinge and where the screw holes go to mount that panel back on. We're going to bring it all the way up to the top, and I've got two connections here. One of them is a kind of a ribbon cable and one of them is a USB-C. It's pretty easy to figure out which one goes into which hole. Let's just make sure that we get them plugged in the right way around and the connection will be finished. So we just have to make sure that our cable stays nicely tucked in there. We can even kind of twist it behind those mounting brackets just a little bit to keep it in place, and we can go ahead and reinstall the panel over top. Next up, we are going to have to install the screen onto the front here so that we're able to see everything and get control of the machine. So we're going to go ahead and take this tape off. That's actually holding our display screen cable in place. We do have some extra slack on that to be able to pull it out. There's a small clip here on the actual connection. We need to pop that up. Some people use their fingernails. I like to get in there with the small Allen wrench and just pop it up. Be very gentle while you're doing that. If you break that clip, we won't be able to make the connection. So now we're going to take the cable with the blue side facing up, and we actually need to slide it in underneath the white part and just give it a little push until it's nice and snug, about as far in as you can get it. And you should see about equal amounts of white and blue once you have it all the way in. There we go. And we can just go ahead and press that clamp back down. Make sure that it's all nice and firmly seated. Gentle tug on the cable will tell you that it definitely is holding. And we can just slowly feed some of our slack back in there. And the screen will mount right into these two little mounting holes. So if you just slide it in and give it a push down, our screen is installed. All right, we have reached the point in the build where if you would like to stop, you can. At this point, we've got everything connected. The only thing that's missing is the enclosure panels for it. So we're gonna go ahead and put them on so that we have a fully enclosed printer. It definitely helps reduce the noise level while it's running. But if you wanna run this as an open frame, go ahead and skip over the enclosure section. So now we're going to go ahead and start installing all of the enclosure pieces. So I've got one of the enclosure pieces. There are two of these, one for each of these back angled sides. And there's a couple of small holes right alongside where you actually have your arm movements here. We're going to need to line it up with those holes on both of these frames, angle it a little bit to get in here. And then we just go ahead and bolt it in place. There's a mirror image set on the bar to my right. There's another set on the other side of this arm with a mirror image set on the bar to the left. So we're going to go ahead and get those bolted in place. We've got our enclosure panels here. We can go ahead and peel the protective film off, which is always satisfying to do. And we've got these two little holes here that are going to bolt into the actual frame holders that we put on there. So we're just going to make sure that those line up before we get everything officially in place. And it looks like I got it right the first time around this time. So in order to hold this in place, there's a couple of little toggle clips at both the bottom and the top. And that's going to hold it in place until we can get the bolts on. So now that I've come over to see it and I've aligned it properly with the bolts, I'll go ahead and turn those little toggles down again. And turn the bottom ones up. And we're going to be using the M3x6 bolts so that we can attach it right through these holes. And now that I'm doing that, I think I need some gaskets to go with those as well. So they did give us a pack of gaskets for this installation. That'll make sure that the bolts don't go all the way through the acrylic holes. So we realized when we reviewed all of the footage that we didn't actually have a shot of this. Within this assembly here, where the arms actually attach onto the extruder, there's the main screw, and then there's also a little grub screw right in the hole beside it. So I've taken one out so we can reinstall it for you. It is a very tricky spot to get into, so you probably should get these started at the same time that you're starting up the other screws in there, which is when we did it initially. So you just want to make sure you get it inserted into that hole and tighten it down until it stops turning, and that's going to make sure that everything's held in there nice and tight. Okay, so we've got our door in place. It's got 2 screws in the top hinges, 2 screws in the bottom hinges. We're using the M3x6 bolts with the little gasket on them, and it's as easy as just line up all of your holes, insert the bolt, and start screwing. So now we can move on to the final step, which is installing the door handle. And as I look at this machine, I'm actually thinking, maybe we should have done that first. All right, the door handle is another very easy installation. We're going to be using an M2.9 screw. Yes, that's a weird size, but that's what it's labeled on the bag. And these are the 2.9 by 8, and we're gonna put a gasket on that as well. It's just a matter of bolt coming through the back, and it screws right into the handle. I'm gonna go ahead and start it with my fingers for the top and the bottom, and I'll come back with the Allen wrench and get everything tightened down. All right, now that we've finished assembly, we've got the printer plugged in and turned on. Let's go through some of the different screen features that we've got. So we're gonna start here on the home screen, where I'm seeing everything that I would expect to see on a home screen. It's telling us some of the print speeds, which is 1,000 millimeters per second print and 3,000 millimeters per second acceleration. This particular model is able to push 90 millimeters cubed per second of filament, which is pretty impressive. And the fan spins at up to 30,000 RPM. It is noisy while it runs. It does have the full CPAP cooling on it. It needs that to be able to print at these speeds, but luckily, you'll see in a moment, they've included a little cheat to help us get around that. And it's also telling me the build volume. So we've got 260 by 260 by 330. That 260, because this is a round bed printer, is actually going to be the diameter of the circle. So just remember, it's a circle that you can print in, not a square for this particular model. After that, we're going to go down to the little printer icon. That's where we can see all of the different preloaded models that it came with. Like most printers these days, it's coming with some pretty standard models to be able to get some test prints out, see what it is that's going on with everything. We've got our Pal Benchy, which is always a good print to start with your calibrations. The Lighthouse, which Flsun likes to include. Oops, I went a little too far there. Let's go back to our local there. And it also includes a silencer. Now this silencer print is actually to quiet down the machine while it's running. It sits right over top of the CPAP intake, and I do recommend that you print that as one of your first prints. After that, we are going to get into all of the different control and configuration settings that we've got here. So we're able to home our axes, lock the motors, unlock the motors. We can do microcontrol movements on any of the different axes that we have for movement. We can go ahead and control the nozzle temperature, heat bed temperature. We can tell it what we want to preheat for, and it's got 3 convenient settings on there for PLA, PETG, and ABS. Those are pretty good settings to work from. Regardless of which material you're loading in there, one of those will probably have temperatures that will help. You're also able to push filament into the extruder with this top button, or pull filament out of the extruder with the bottom button. I do need to remember this is a touch screen because I keep tapping it by accident. Next is going to be our different fan controls, so we're able to adjust the part cooling fan. That comes in handy when, the machine's running a little bit too loud, you can turn the part cooling fan down just a bit so that it's not quite as annoying when you're running those first couple of prints. You're also able to control your chamber fan. You can turn it on or off, and you can control the light from this one. And then we get into the different calibrations that you can do. You've got your vibration compensation as well as your bed leveling. You can run the two of those together, or you could run them individually so that you can calibrate one or the other. After that, we will get into all of the settings. This is where we're able to review all of the different settings that exist on it. So we've got our Wi-Fi and internet settings to be able to check everything that's connected. We can go through the general settings, which is where we tell it if we want it to auto sleep, adjust the screen brightness, change the language, all of that kind of stuff. It has different QR codes under guide so that you can just scan those with your phone, pull up the user guide or the FAQ. That's really convenient if you start getting into any problems or issues with how things are going. And we've got the About tab. So this is where you're going to be able to see the model, how much space you've got available on the internal storage as well as the external storage. You can run a factory reset on it if you ever need to, and you're also going to be able to see your firmware version right there. So that's a really handy tool to be able to tell if you're running the most recent firmware. If you start getting into any problems with the machine where it's not functioning the way that you think it should be or something's just gone off, you can always check your firmware version here. You are able to actually update it through Wi-Fi using this little arrow icon here, but you can also check what the latest version is to see if you're already running it or not. After that, we get into the actual file storage settings. So we've got the option of the local files or the USB files for whichever one you need to access to be able to do things. You can get into your models folder, your videos folder, which is going to go through all of your time lapses and also any of the logs from the print. So if there's any failure or errors, you're going to be able to go ahead and find those. So now that we've gone through all the different screen functions, we should probably get some filament loaded into this machine and let's see how it prints. All right, so we're going to go ahead and load some filament into the machine here. The filament spool holder is in a little bit of an awkward position if you're not used to Delta printers. It actually hangs right here from the center inside the machine, and it's got this peg that the spool actually goes on. So you're going to need to rotate it up so that you can pull the peg all the way out, bring your filament spool up, and hold it in place while you slide the peg back through. It's got to go through the hole on both sides or you're going to drop it on the build plate. Go ahead and ask me how I know. And then you can just go ahead and let this angled part hang back down. So that does hold the filament nice and securely. All right, let's run down all of the features that this printer has to offer. So first and foremost, let's talk about build volume. This is a Delta printer, which means it does have that wonderful round build plate on it, like most of them do. It is a flexible build plate, textured PEI coated, which is one of my favorite types of build plates. I don't have to worry about scrapers anymore. The build volume on this is actually 260 millimeters, and that's the diameter of the circle. And the build height that you're able to get on this one is 330 millimeters. So, being that it's a Delta, I do just want to caution that 330, we'll need to bring it down just a little bit if you're maxing out your width of the build plate, because you still got to have room for that extruder to go up there. Overall, it's a very fast printer. I think I mentioned before, we're able to print up to 1,000 millimeters per second on it, 3,000 millimeters per second acceleration going on. We've got wicked crazy part cooling. This particular model is running a CPAP for part cooling, so it does run a little bit loud. It almost sounds like a vacuum cleaner's running until you add the silencer onto it. But it definitely gets the prints out the way that it's supposed to. It needs that airflow to be able to print at those speeds. On the inside here, we've got some definitely great features. This here is a dual gear direct drive extruder, so we're going to be able to print our PLAs, our PETGs, TPUs, nylons, all of those without having any problems. The max temp on the nozzle is 300 degrees Celsius, which tells me that's also an all metal hot end that's in there. The build plate is able to get up to 110 degrees Celsius. So you'll be able to start printing ASA, ABS, all those materials without having any of the warping issues that you can sometimes get, especially because this model does come with its full glass door as well as acrylic enclosure panels. You do have the option of not installing those if you don't want to, but they come with the printer, and why wouldn't we enclose it if we're able to? Other than that, I mean, it's just a solid, stable printer. We ran some test prints, as you can see here, and everything was coming out beautifully. I don't think we had any failures while we were putting this through testing, which is saying something because we're not nice to new printers when we test them around here. All right, let's take a look at some of the prints that came off of the printer here. So we've got our pal Benchy, of course, he's always in there. I don't think I need to talk about him anymore. The next print that we ran is the silencer. It looks kind of like a Christmas tree, but it actually sits right up here on top of the CPAP intake, and it cuts the volume way down when this printer is running. It goes from sounding like somebody's vacuuming right beside you to you actually don't mind listening to it going off in the background, almost like a white noise machine. Some of the other prints that we did, this is another one of their calibrations. The model comes pre-installed, pre-loaded, pre-sliced on the printer. It's just a nice lighthouse to be able to sit on your desk, pretty thing to look at type of idea. But we did get this really smooth finish coming up on all of the rocks. So you're able to see all of the different angles. I really like the look of this. I think it's probably gonna start living on my desk. But all of the stairs came out nice and crisp and clean. If I had one complaint about this, it's just a little bit jagged up here on the top of the rock surfaces. If I were to slice it myself, I would probably slow down the speed a little bit. I know I touched on this with the Benchy, but always remember, when you're printing the factory prints that came with the machine, they're trying to showcase the features that you're looking for in it. So they're always going to max out the speed. They're always going to make sure that it's moving as fast as it can, pushing as much filament as it can. And as much as that is within spec, that doesn't always mean it's a great idea to do it that way. So for this particular model, I think I'm gonna download it from the Flsun website and slice it again just to clean up those rocks a little bit. But if my only complaint is the top of the rocks, I'd say it's still a pretty good print. We managed to get a nice, clean bridging and overhang through all of the windows. This guardrail around the lighthouse up here is nice and clean. We've got a little bit of filament droop happening as it came up the dome, but if you've printed anything, you know that those things are kind of to be expected when we're running at twice the speed we can usually get out of most printers. I did a fun little astronaut. These are just nice for kids. I like to print them off every so often. My kids decorate them. I've got a whole shelf full of astronauts at home with all different colored spacesuits, but he came out really nice and clean. It was able to come up around all of these curves and craters in the moon, give me a nice smooth, clean finish. The supports, I mean, I had a little bit of trouble taking them off, but I've had that anytime I've printed this model. And if I were to compare this to something that I've printed on a K1 or a Bamboo, or even, I still run Ender 3 Pros at home, this is just normal for this model. It's one of the downfalls we need to accept about 3D printing in general, is sometimes a little post-processing is required. Get in there with some side cutters in about 2 minutes and I'll have it cleaned up. I let the tech boys get their hands on this one, of course. One of them decided to print a fishing trophy. I'm impressed by this, to be perfectly honest. This particular model is a bit of a challenge to be able to print. Coming up these curves on the fish without getting crazy ringing and Z-seams and everything is not an easy thing for a printer to do. And it's one of the places where Delta printers actually shine, because we've got the 3 arms moving around. It was able to come up this curve, and I'm not seeing the ringing lines that we usually do. We're not seeing any of the jerk or acceleration tweaking that needs to happen when we get into a Core XY or a Cartesian or any of those styles of printers. So this one actually turned out quite well. And my favorite test print that we ran on this one is actually out of our polychromatic PLA. So we went with a low poly model. That's one of the best ways to show off the different colors in the polychromatics, but it came out beautiful. There is not a droop, not a sag, not a problem with this print, and it came out exactly the way that it was supposed to. So, Final impression on the Flsun T1, I like it. It's a good printer. It's solid, it's stable, it's user-friendly. It's using the Flsun slicing software, which you can download for free from their website, or you can just go ahead and take the copy that's pre-installed on the USB drive. It's a very easy to use slicing software with a very easy to use user interface on the printer. I personally am a fan of the interfaces that are just a little bit stripped down, a few less features to trip over. And all in all, it is a stable, reliable printer that's not going to take up huge amounts of space, but is still going to give you large amounts of build volume. And it's perfect for any sort of rapid prototyping or high turnover printing environment. The question everybody's going to want to ask, are we going to carry it? When is it going to be in stock? I don't know that. They gave me the printer and they asked me to do a video. The purchasing team has to answer that question. If you really want to know, feel free to send us an email about it, but it's probably going to be about 6 months before we would have any answers for that. So I hope you guys enjoyed watching me build this video. I hope you enjoy all of the prints that we do. We always have so much fun testing out new models of printers because that's what makes printing fun for everybody. So if you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you next time.